Or I guess it's still morning, and welcome to the Metropolitan Policy Committee meeting Thursday, March 7th, 2019. And I guess we'll just begin with introductions. We have late coming elected officials, so we'll just start ahead. I'm Lucy Venus, Mayor of Eugene. Sorry, caught you with a mouthful.
Joe Pishneri, Springfield City Council.
Gino Grimaldi, City of Springfield.
Asha Vartanian, Lynn County.
Ray Smith, Coburg Mayor.
Ann Heath, City of Coburg.
Paul Thompson, Elcog.
Brenda Wilson, Elcog. Franny Brindle, ODOT.
Bill Johnston, ODOT.
AJ LTD.
Carl Ye, LTD.
Kate Reed, LTD Board.
We'll wait and give Claire a minute and go to the audience.
Drew Pepper, Elcog.
Ellen Courier, Elcog.
Chris Henry, City of Eugene.
Andrew Martin, Lane Transit District.
Rob Interfeld, City of Eugene. Crouch West, LTD.
Kelly Clark, Elcog.
Nobody of our people
Jeff Vernon, City of Coburg.
Bob Jacob,
you want?
Springfield Transportation.
Charlene Riley, River Road.
James Stacker, City of Springfield Transportation.
Didn't even know we worked for it.
Okay, thank you all. We'll let folks, as they arrive, we'll just announce that new people have joined us. And because we don't have a quorum, I'm going to just dive, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Claire Syret, City of Eugene City Council.
Perfect. Okay, thank you all. Do we want to wait until we have a quorum before we have comments from the audience? Or should we begin?
It's up to you.
I feel as if you ought to get a good hearing from everybody, so I think I'll hold on that, and we'll just do the items that don't require a quorum. So we'll go down to 6C, Safe Lane Coalition.
I have a PowerPoint presentation for this, so
Okay.
I'm blind view when I turn it up.
No,
We should be below the radar there.
Okay, my name is Ellen Courier. I'm with Lynn Council of Governments, and I was the planner that worked on our 2017 safety planning project that we're going to give a little update on. So in 2017, we adopted our first ever safety plan for the Metropolitan Planning Organization. It was a collaboration with Lane County. So we did a joint planning process and adopted two distinct plans from that process. And it was the first time, we'd always had safety as part of our priorities in our regional transportation plans and our funding, but it was the first time we'd really examined what were the causes of crashes in our area and what are some of the strategies that we can implement as an MPO to address those crashes. So I handed out the strategies that came out of that planning and the implementation status of those. So we have some short range, midterm, and long range strategies adopted in that plan. And a major part of our implementation is the Safe Lane Coalition, which is what we're going to talk about today. So what came out of this planning process was a collaboration with ODOT, and they were able to provide some funding for us to hire a safety coordinator to help with that implementation. So most of this implementation actually focuses on programming and education because we're not doing a lot of engineering. We are doing collaboration with enforcement, and we're working with community partners and working with our coalition, which is members of the MPO and also Lane County. So this program does extend outside of the MPO boundaries to look at some rural issues as well. And Drew Pefferly is our Safe Lane Coalition coordinator, and he's going to talk about some of the programs that we've implemented from that planning process.
Yes, the Safe Lane Coalition works towards implementing the systematic changes outlined in the action plan with the goal of eliminating death and life-changing injuries on Lane County's transportation network. So the coalition is currently made up of 12 members, but we're always looking for new community members to join and contribute. We meet once a month, the fourth Thursday of every month. where we get together and we collaborate and share resources, give updates on safety projects, and prioritize our work plan for the coming month. What I want to highlight for you today is a lot of the work that's come out of our partnerships with all of our members. And the first thing I'd like to talk to is the most recent project that we've been working on. And it is a program that emphasizes safety on incomplete streets. Last month, we heard the MPC committee heard from Irene Ferguson was killed when she was struck by a car in the Beaver-Hunsaker area. Her friend and community members came and spoke to the committee about the hazardous area. While there are infrastructure projects that are in development to improve pedestrian safety, those are still a few years from being complete. So what we are partnering with Lane County to provide neighbors the opportunity to post these yard signs, not only in the Beaver-Hunsaker area, but in every area around Eugene and Lane County that has incomplete streets. The yard signs emphasize that this is a community, that there are people living in this area. While there might not be sidewalks, be aware, slow down, we're a neighborhood. Like I said, we're partnering with Lane County, and we've also got private sponsorships to produce these yard signs.
And Point to Point LTD is also working with us on this project to do some outreach with some of the housing around the area, so they'll have some lights that they can provide and some safety vests for people that are out walking in that community. And the intent is to have kind of a pilot project that we could be able to implement some of these strategies in other neighborhoods that might need something like this while they're waiting for infrastructure improvements.
The next project and partnership I'd like to talk about is our partnership with Safe Routes to School. The Safe Routes to School coordinator in Springfield came to our coalition meeting and voiced his concern that there were a lot of distracted drivers dropping off and picking up their kids in the school zone. And according to a recent study by the Safe Kids USA, 1 out of every 6 drivers in a school zone are distracted by the use of cell phones, eating, drinking, smoking, reaching behind, grooming, and reading. So they're doing a lot of things, but not paying attention while school children are running about. So we created 10 signs that have a distracted driving safety message on them, and when they are properly lined up in the pickup zone, it creates a very visually appealing attraction, and it raises awareness about the dangers of distracted driving. And through a partnership with Lane Transit District, they were able to provide services to get 5 of the signs translated into Spanish. So the signs have been implemented and displayed throughout the Thurston Elementary School, Douglas Gardens, Mount Vernon, and the Buena Vista Spanish Immersion Elementary. We consider this a community resource. We have all of the PDFs on our website for other community members to download, and they can print and display them in their neighborhood, in the school zones. So at the end of this presentation, I'll provide the URL where everyone's feel free to go and download the posters. The next partnership is with the Lane Education Service District. There's a new program that was implemented in 2018 called Teens Driving Safely. And the program aims to improve access to driver's education to all high schools in Lane County by partnering with school districts and private driving instructors to provide access to driver's education in rural areas at an affordable price. That is a concern that was raised that in the rural area of Lane County, there was not a lot of opportunities for a proper driver's education. And according to a study, teen drivers who have not completed driver's education are 75% more likely to get a traffic ticket and 24% more likely to be involved in a fatal or serious injury crash than those who did complete a formal driver's education program. So the Teens Driving Safely program is ran by one person that her main job is to focus on getting sponsorships, donations, volunteers for the program so we can keep on like funding and running itself. And they do not have a lot of time or resources to create some of the materials that are needed to facilitate the program. So that's where the Safe Lane Coalition has came in to provide and work with them to create a logo at no cost to them, to create materials that they need at no cost to them. So it is providing a valuable resource to the community at large with this partnership. The next partnership is with Lane County. We've done a lot of community outreach with Lane County, whether that be at the fairgrounds, where we had a booth to raise traffic safety and speeding awareness for families with children. We had a hopscotch that had a safety message in each box. So not only did the children get a safety message, they also learned how to play hopscotch, because a lot of people, kids were unaware. And it was a great opportunity for the parents, because they would read the message before the child would jump onto the square, and it created a dialogue. And it was just a real great opportunity to see that happening. While at the fair, we had pledges that we were asking. We had one for drivers to sign that pledged to just be aware, do not speed. And we had a child's pledge for them to be vigilant, and if they saw their driver speeding or talking on the cell phone, to bug them. And they were. The children had crayons, and the pledges were stickers that went onto their shirt. And it was fun walking around into the fair, and you could see all the children that had the pledges that had been to the booth. So other outreach opportunities with Lane County, we have worked with some communities in the summer. In July, we went to Cottage Grove and provided a community safety event where Lane County talked about some of the infrastructure projects that were happening in Cottage Grove and how they related to traffic safety. And the coalition was there to provide additional resources at the community event. And it was great to get out and talk to some residents that probably were unaware of the coalition. And we're hoping to have that same success later on in this year at Junction City to provide a similar community workshop with highlighting the speeding through North River Road and Highway 99. And the last partnership opportunity with Lane County is we've provided a lot of research. The Lane County will reach out and ask us to provide research on a particular topic and present to their fatal crash investigator team. We provided a white paper for traffic safety enforcement cameras in Oregon, and how that could be implemented here in Lane County and what steps would need to be taken just as a first step. And we've also done DUI prevention, white paper on DUI prevention strategies in rural areas. Another partnership through the coalition is with community organizations. I want to highlight one, our partnership with Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. We reached out to them for a partnership opportunity to promote awareness for the World Day of Remembrance on November 18th. And that evolved into a project where we created a video for a call to action. And I believe that was presented last month to the committee. And while the premiere of the video was at the University of Oregon's women's basketball on the World Day of Remembrance, November 18th. We also had a booth at the arena to talk to community members as they came into the game about the safety pledge. And we created a safe lane pledge to be a safe lane driver that really highlighted that we want all drivers in safe lane to make the driver's seat a phone-free zone, drive the speed limit, only drive when you're sober, and have a clear mind when driving. So if you're daydreaming, angry, or if you're sad, that's distracted driving. A lot of people don't really consider that, but if you're upset, you shouldn't be driving because you're just as dangerous as if you had not got enough sleep or if you were intoxicated. So we created that pledge along with a pledge for pedestrians, for walkers, for bicyclists, as well as the children pledge. And that is also a community resource that is up on our website that we take to our tabling events just to get the word out. And the last partnership I'd like to talk to you today and highlight what we've done in 2018 is our partnership with the Lane County Public Health to promote our DUI prevention campaign, Get a Ride. Get a Ride reinforces our community's expectation that alcohol should be consumed in a responsible manner and remind everyone that there are plenty of options for getting home safely. We've created posters, table tents, coasters to be displayed at establishments throughout Lane County. For the holidays, we targeted 20 bars and restaurants through data that was provided to us by OLCC that tracked the last location that an impaired driver was at before they were pulled over. So we went to those top 20 establishments and we distributed over 2,000 Get a Ride materials, as well as a alcohol safety handout that had tips for servers to recognize signs of intoxication or prevent over-serving, as well as we distributed a flyer for discounted ride homes on New Year's Eve. The New Year's Eve Safe Get a Ride Home program was put on by community partners such as Better Eugene Springfield Transportation, MAD, and Association Technology of Oregon. They partnered to get these codes, and we created a flyer and distributed the flyers to all the establishments. And we encouraged the management to hang the discount codes for Lyft, for Uber, for Eugene Taxi on the doors to the bathrooms, to the door to the exits, and around the bars. And we had a lot of positive interactions with the management when we were distributing the materials, especially the flyers and the coasters. The establishments couldn't get enough of those, and they really appreciated having these to hand out right before New Year's Eve, which is one of their busier nights of the year. And the DUI campaign has also been promoted at community events, such as the Florence Rhododendron Days, the county fair, no, pardon me, the country fair, and the Coburg Golden Year Festival, where we were able to have a booth to talk about DUI prevention while at the festival. We are planning on having alcohol awareness training 2 times in 2019, one in Springfield to target servers and management to have opportunity to talk to OLCC and to get refreshed on best practices when serving alcohol, and the same thing for Eugene in the fall. Those are the partnerships and programs that we've done within the last year. And for 2019, we're looking on to creating a marijuana prevention program, much like our alcohol Get a Ride campaign. We're looking forward to creating a marijuana prevention campaign as well with Lane County Public Health, as well as improving our volunteer program throughout Lane County. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's great. Thank you so much. I just want to lead off with a comment, and I'll keep a queue if anyone else wants to comment. I love what you have done, and the variety of these programs are really wonderful. The signage sounds great. The hopscotch game, terrific. I mean, I heard a lot of buzz around the New Year's Eve protection. I mean, I just think the variety of things you've done and the different ways you've outreach, and the driver's ed for rural teenagers sounds incredibly valuable and important. So thank you for that work. I thought it was a great report, and I'm excited about the work you're doing. So thank you so much. Kate?
Hey, thank you so much, Drew. I just wanted to mention to the committee that Mayor Lundberg and I were at OMPOC when you made your presentation to a number of other COGs, and I just wanted to point out how impressed the other agencies were with the work that we're doing with Safe Lane Coalition. And I think it's important that we all get that feedback because other people they wanted the website, they wanted to know how you form the partnerships and how long it took to get things up and running. So just good job.
Right, and I forgot to mention that Mayor Lundberg has arrived since we began.
Yes.
So we know.
Finally.
Yes.
Yes, so, and I do
you want to
have-
speak? Okay, go
Yeah.
for it. And then-
So I did, this was from back when we first got the information, and I saved it for the March MPC meeting. So I had, maybe there a little bit is comments about, under the strategies, is I always look at I'm looking at strategy 8, which is develop and execute targeted campaigns about helmet use, high visibility and protective clothing. And I can't emphasize enough that if there's one thing you see, it's people not using helmets. And even though it's 16, or I believe it's probably still 16, you have to wear a helmet, that is to encourage everyone to wear a darn helmet, because if there's one thing that, is going to increase safety, it's having a helmet on. And it's not a rule that necessarily a police officer is going to rush up and give somebody, a child, a ticket over. So how we go about doing that to make sure that it becomes cool to wear your helmet. I had a little discussion on one of the bike safety days with a little boy. He was not going to put his helmet on, and we had a little, I'm not going to let you go to school until you put your helmet on, okay? And so we had a little discussion about it. He finally put his helmet on. But how important, because it's not cool to some, I'm the tough guy or whatever. So I'm very supportive of that strategy to encourage that, and how to make it cool, or maybe we can make it funny or something, whatever, but make sure that's done. On strategy 11, it's public awareness about the risks of driving a motorcycle. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not when you're a motorcycle rider. I have owned a big Harley and a small Honda. And it's always, you just have to learn to be very cautious, because you don't take up the road space and people don't see you, but you are on the road, not like a bicycle. So to me, the strategies to me is a little bit different, that it's more, the minute you get on a motorcycle, you realize I am vulnerable. It's the drivers around you that need to be more cautious, is be watching out for a motorcycle. But they're such high mileage vehicles that I don't want to discourage them either. That we can be on the road together. So the way it's worded a little bit, it sounds like, oh, you shouldn't get a motorcycle. Where to me, it's more, it's let's help people for sure be aware that motorcycles are out there, and how to be more, be watching the road more carefully.
And maybe it is worded a little confusing in this strategy, but I think generally our intent is to raise awareness that we're all people using different modes, and so we're trying to use this language of people walking, people driving, people, and people on motorcycles, so that we're recognizing that we all use multiple modes, we all are people, and we want to protect your life no matter what mode you're using. So I think that's the intent of that one, and when looking at the data, we did recognize that motorcycles do have a higher incidence of fatal and severe crashes, just because they don't have protection and they're going the same speed as a vehicle. So that's a great point. And we're just trying to change the way that we think about it, because in the past we've had this kind of conflict. I don't like cyclists, I don't like motorcyclists, but we're just trying to change the language to say we're all people and we're all trying to get somewhere safely.
Yes, and I agree, because I'm thinking the only ones on a motorcycle everybody notices are the police officers, because I bet you we're all paying attention when they're on a motorcycle behind us. And then, and then the long-term strategies, which I think I'm hoping will come up sooner, is the 85th percentile. that I know Portland is working on, and we also talked about that at OMPOC, is that, there could be a new and better way of looking at what the speed limits are, because the speed limits, for many of us, we want to lower them and use that as a strategy too. So I'm very supportive that, that it's not even, and maybe Paul, maybe it's not in the long term anymore, that it's maybe in the shorter term.
I was going to add that at the, I think it was January Oregon Transportation Commission meeting, the OTC did appoint the current speed advisory group as a rulemaking advisory committee to look into the rules around setting speed limits. So without going into the details yet, because they haven't really done much yet, there is now a formal rulemaking advisory committee to look at methodology and flexibility around setting speed limits, and I'll bring more back on that when there is something to report. So it is moving forward.
And we will have an opportunity to relook at these strategies. We're hoping that as part of our next regional transportation plan, we'll be taking the safety plan and combining it. So we'll be reevaluating where we are with these strategies, maybe adding new strategies. So just keep that in mind, that some of these might be shifting in the next couple of years.
Yes, so, but all in all, I think, it's a great approach and it's a great direction, and teaching children how to play hopscotch is a good thing.
Very important skill.
Yes.
Hey, Claire.
Thank you. Yeah, so I want to echo Mayor Venice's remarks about, just really impressed with the breadth of the effort. And, I saw some of this presentation at the Lane Act and really appreciate it. And I especially want to appreciate the attempt to be as responsive as possible to the accident on Hunsucker Lane and the unimproved roads strategy. I think that's really commendable, that we're not able to get out there and do infrastructure changes, but there are other things that we can do to help increase safety on those unimproved roads. So I really want to appreciate that in particular.
Great. Counselor?
Yes, on the enforcement end of things, I know that you folks are proactive, or at least I know ODOT has been proactive in letting grants, safety grants to the local law enforcement agencies for example, DUI enforcement. And as you can tell with the statistics, the rural areas are higher speed, and so therefore you have a higher incidence of more severe accidents and fatalities, and that's the reason for that. But I am curious, on these grants that are let for enforcement, what percentage, I know there's a lot of emphasis on DUI enforcement, but in regards to, for example, school safety zone grants, specific grants for school safety zones that would go with your program when you're putting out signs, et cetera, I think enforcement at that time would be very effective. And it doesn't, I'm not a proponent of saying, okay, cite everybody and get their money, but getting pulled over is an attention getter.
Oh, yeah.
And so I also look at your long-term strategy, or mid to long-term strategy of 6 to 10 years, and I think there's an item here that could be brought forward instead of waiting, and that would be the same thing. I don't know when the last time a grant for enforcement of law enforcement was ever let for safety in a workplace corridor or in a work corridor. They do it in many other states. In fact, they pay officers to stay at that site and enforce during the work cycle. But has there been a grant that does the law enforcement, or pays for law enforcement to specifically focus on a work corridor, in a work corridor?
I have not heard of one, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I know that ODOT does, their safety division has a lot of grants that they provide to enforcement. One of the challenges is that those grants need to be used for overtime, and so we have kind of a constraint here in that we may not have enough officers that are able to work overtime or enough staff capacity to do that. So that's one of our limitations in using those ODOT grants. Franny, do you know if they have them specifically for work corridors?
We have them for our construction, for overtime enforcement for our construction projects, for worker safety.
Well, that's my bad. I'm actually mixing construction with work corridor, so.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but my concern about the school zone and the distracted drivers picking up and dropping off school kids, I think that what the Safe Lane Coalition has done has been marvelous. But I'd like to see everybody take responsibility for safety, every agency, every school, everybody. And I really do think that it bears on the school district itself to be out there and looking and making sure their kids are safe when they're getting dropped off and picked up. And if parents are looking down, then that ought to be something that's kind of noted. Whether or not they get, a safety officer of their own or whatever to do enforcement and write a ticket once in a while. It would be like, and I was talking to Bill about this, these grants and whatnot, it would be like asking for help from somebody to help us be safe on our construction zones. Every agency has to, I think, bear responsibility for safety. And I'd like to see the schools step up and take that responsibility very seriously.
Right, and perhaps you're getting the wrong message. I'm not saying it's ODOT's responsibility.
Right,
I'm
okay.
saying that and ODOT.
No, I didn't think you were.
ODOT does a lot, especially with the DOI grants, et cetera, and I get that. But that's with NTSB mostly, though, right?
Yeah, it's NHTSA. Yeah.
So I'm saying that as far as the coalition is concerned, I think there's a lot of conversation that exactly what she's saying is that communication with the local law enforcement agencies, specifically asking, hey, we have this program going on, if you can free up an officer, or most agencies have traffic teams, so you can ask to have a traffic team officer assignment during this campaign or specific campaigns you have that are active at the time. Would go a long way. But I also think too is that like Fernine is saying is that it's Franny, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Got a glare. With the school districts, I think they would play a huge role, and Springfield just took on a new superintendent. I think it'd be a great time to communicate with our new superintendent in Springfield and perhaps raise those concerns and see if they can start building a partnership right away. But I think there's a lot more that can be done in that area, and it doesn't need to wait 5 and 6 and 7 years, but I think a lot more work could be done in that area to be more effective.
That's a great point. We didn't mention in the presentation, but in the first year of our grant, we were able to purchase some of those speed feedback signs, and the county's deploying those in front of schools, and I think Springfield is also deploying them in front of schools, and that's helpful as not enforcement, but a lot of people perceive that as enforcement, and they usually have a pretty good response rate of people slowing down in those areas.
Great. Mayor?
A couple of issues. I'd like to, again, thank you. The multifaceted approach on so many aspects of it, from wearing helmets on bikes, skateboards, and scooters. After a quarter of a century of public safety as a paramedic, trying to get the kids to think that a helmet is cool instead of banging their melon on the pavement is the biggest goal of all. Working on the University of Oregon campus, I used to just talk to the young adults about their helmets and issues there. And after seeing so many of those, I think that's something that is kind of a hidden thing in so many aspects of our transportation, especially among young people, that it feels like it needs to be brought up to a higher level as far as helmets and the safety. We all need to be personally accountable, including kids on bikes and scooters and skateboards. And so the pledge thing is a big part of that. The bigger part, going back to the schools and the schools being responsible. My wife is retiring after 30 years in schools, and that's a real tough personal issue for her, is trying to get parents to be accountable and seeing them on their cell phone while they're driving through a parking lot with kids and other parents on cell phones. And she has just felt so frustrated because she is absolutely powerless to do anything with that. And should you ever mention it, you're going to get your head ripped off by a parent that really doesn't care. So I think that's a really big issue that needs to be brought forward to make those parents more accountable. And as Commissioner Piscineri said, usually that's with somebody that pays attention. There was a comment about, we pay attention to the cops on motorcycles. Well, we need to have those cops present in those school zones. And I understand they're not available to be there all the time, but that is an issue where I think cops need to be present. And that will change that behavior and hopefully make those parents more accountable, because God knows the the people that work at schools care about the kids, and they see this stuff all the time, and they're powerless. So with a joint effort between the upper administration of schools and law enforcement, I think that would just be a huge element to increase the safety in school zones for our kids and others.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to see that Commissioner Burney has arrived, and so I think that brings us up to quorum. So we're going to go back to the top of the agenda. No, you know what? Everybody's got busy schedules, and I will say that I believe that Mayor Lundberg and I both have. Are you going to the 1 o'clock meeting? Mm-hmm. So we also, Mayor Lundberg and I, will be leaving a few minutes before 1. So we'll try to get anything that requires action before then. Okay, so
One more quick thing.
yes, okay.
So just specifically, where'd he go? There he is. Specifically, I just wanted to post these questions to you, or pose these questions to you, is that what are the specific goals for next year, specifically, and then, and you don't necessarily have to drum those up right now, but perhaps share them in some forum. And then how will Springfield and the other coalition agencies partners have a role in establishing goals for each year?
I can answer that. We apply for a grant through ODOT every year, and that's when we establish our goals for the next year. And the coalition, which is made up of your staff, all help participate in that grant writing process. So we kind of do our goal setting when we apply for that grant. We have kind of specific strategies that we're going to address. This year, we're going to continue to roll out the Get a Ride campaign and hopefully expand to marijuana dispensaries as well. So that's kind of the focus for this year. Our data really showed that marijuana and alcohol are kind of the main things that we should be focusing on to prevent crashes.
And then, also on your comment you made earlier in regards to you have the overtime, or the overtime is paid for law enforcement, and it's an availability issue, and I don't know if many folks caught on to that, but many agencies simply do not have the officers available to work the overtime because they're already maxed out. So that's something that and I know that from personal experience, and there's a solution to that, perhaps, and it may be a moving target, but I think that if a little imagination could be applied here and look at a targeted position that is paid, dedicated position paid, without having to take from the general officer pool, from the enforcement pool, but have a dedicated position to an agency that has the enforcement capacity and all that in our region, that literally look at it at paying for a position dedicated to that, and see what the costs are, and see if someone is willing to come up with that kind of money, perhaps in that same goal-setting session. But I think there's a solution, and that a dedicated officer or two throughout the county that's moving in different spots and keeps everybody on their toes would be very effective, instead of having to worry about whether an officer is available or not.
Great point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I want to go back to the top of the agenda, and can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make the most.
Do I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Any opposed? All right, thank you very much. Second on any adjustments to the, I've already fiddled with the agenda, but any other adjustments to the agenda? Okay, so I'm just going to, I am aware that 6A is a public hearing, and so we'll do that. That's at the top anyway, and that's the only one, right, that have action? Okay. All right, it's time for comments from the audience. Do we have a few? Carlene Riley.
Good afternoon, I guess. Carlene Riley, 395 Marion Lane. This is a litany of appreciation. Thank you for listening last month to the pedestrian death of Irene Ferguson on January 17th. Various jurisdictions have rallied with safety actions that bode well. I appreciate the work Becky Taylor, and the Lane County transportation staff have assembled. exploring various safety engineering along Hunsaker this summer, such as increasing shoulder width with some gravel and painting wider fog line area for pedestrians buffered with possible reflective delineators. Possible installation of rapid flashing pedestrian beacon in the area, working with Safe Lane Coalition, and they stole my thunder, to develop safety education with outreach to assisted living facilities, to provide pedestrian safety education and some reflective vests and lights, and designing a yard sign, which you saw earlier, to encourage drivers to slow down and be aware of pedestrians walking along the road, promoting a new sidewalk infill project in River Road along North Park from Howard to Maxwell. I am pleased to have recently met with LTD folks, and they are amenable to memorializing Irene near the new Santa Clara Transit Station. It probably won't entail naming the station after her because they are named after the geographic location to provide wayfinding for transit riders. A proposed memorial idea will be taken to the Santa Clara Community Organization for review. This is a very reasonable approach. I am grateful for the discussions with Eugene Public Works Matt Rodriguez, and I'm sorry he's not here, about reducing speed limits. He wrote, "The City of Eugene is participating in a speed zone roundtable discussion with ODOT and other Oregon cities and counties. We expect the changes will be completed in early to mid-2020 and will significantly change the process for setting speeds to be more people-centric. We know this will all take time, but it will be worth it in the long run if all of our neighborhoods have the ability to improve pedestrian safety by having speed limits reduced where there is greater risk. We will be looking forward to ongoing safety measures as opportunities arise." Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, Rob Zako.
Thank you, Chair Venus, members of MPC. I'm Rob Zako, Executive Director of Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. I want to second what Carlene said, and Best is very concerned and deeply saddened by the loss of Irene Ferguson and doing what we can to help with that. I'm here today to talk about moving ahead, and I hope that I'm not upstaging your staff. I'm not quite sure what they're going to tell you, but I want to make 3 points today about moving ahead: transit tomorrow, prioritization, and federal funding. So first, transit tomorrow. Say you have some business and you make widgets, really high quality widgets, you do them by hand. You wouldn't invest $1 million in some sort of automation to make 10 widgets a day. That wouldn't be cost effective. But if you're making thousands of widgets a day, then it might be cost effective to say, let's get some capital investment, some infrastructure to make those widgets more efficiently. Similarly, if you're running a bus on River Road only every 30 minutes, it might not make a lot of sense to invest a lot of infrastructure, MX, to run only every 30 minutes. If you run every 10 or 15 minutes, then that's something to consider. So transit tomorrow is about service, about where we want service and how often. And there's a question about whether we want coverage, which is less frequent service, or ridership, more frequent service. We'll have the answers to that from the LTD board later this month, and that will inform moving ahead, allowing you and others to make informed decisions about where to make transportation investments. Second, prioritization. Hypothetically speaking, I don't know, moving ahead might say, let's do Highway 99, Enhanced Corridor, River Road Enhanced Corridor, MX, Cobury Road Enhanced Corridor. We have some other projects. The City of Eugene is working on the Franklin Boulevard transformation, which is going to need funding. Springfield is working on Franklin Boulevard in Glenwood and is looking for phase 2 funding for that. Springfield has the Main McVeigh Transit Study and is looking to do some improvements on Main Street in Springfield. And we also have work on Beltline. I lost track, but that's 6, 7, 8 projects. They're probably all seeking funding. There's a question of prioritization of who goes first or what money to seek first. Presumably this body will have that conversation when it involves federal funds about which to do. And so don't think of moving ahead as in isolation. Think of it as part of all these different projects you're discussing. Third, federal funding. The gravy days, as far as we know, are over. West UGMX was funded by federal and state funding. The feds put up about $80 million. The state put up about $20 million, an 80-20 split, and we got that project for little or no local investment. The guidelines now are 50-50 split. So if we want a $100 million project, we'll get $50 million of federal funding if we compete well, but we have to come up with another $50 million from state or local funding. The state may say on transit projects, you already have stiff funding. We're giving you $5 million a year from the employee payroll tax. Why are you coming back to us asking for more? I don't know. I'm not saying what's going to happen. I'm just saying that as we decide what we want to do, that's great, but at some point in time, we're going to have to figure out how to pay for it. And this federal, state, local funding match is something that we'll all have to work out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments on public comments? Thank you very much. And now we are ready to go to item 6A, Transit Asset Management Performance Measures. Yippee.
So we are going to have a public hearing discussing the supporting ODOT's transit asset management performance measures. We talked about this last month, but just as a refresher, this is part of the federal move towards performance-based planning. We are adopting or moving to support performance measures in all different categories. Over the past year, we looked at safety, pavement, bridge, CMAC, system performance, and freight. And this is our final one that we have not addressed yet. And we need to either support the state in their targets or create our own.
Thank you. And do we have people signed up to speak to this?
Excuse me, there's no one signed up at this time.
Okay, so I guess that closes that public hearing, unless there's any other comment, right? Okay. We will go on then to letter of recommendation for Sid Lykin.
No, we need to vote.
Oh, we need to vote. I'm sorry. My apologies. I'm like charging ahead. Okay. Yes, that's right. We have an action. So any discussion or questions on this topic? Okay.
I'll move to adopt a resolution 2019-01.
The second, somewhere?
Is that the right one?
Just a quick correction, it's 02 on the resolution. The memo is incorrect, but the resolution is correct.
I'm looking at that. Wait a second. We didn't. I
Yeah,
thought we
the
did.
attachment, the resolution is numbered correctly.
Gotcha.
02.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, it passes. Thank you very much for keeping me on track and for the vote. Thank you. All right.
We did 01 last meeting, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. All right, now we're at 6B, letter of recommendation for Sid Lykin for OTC.
That is me, thank you. So yet again, there will be an opening on the Oregon Transportation Commission coming up. Current chair of the OTC, Tammy Bainey, her term ends June 30th, and due to term limits, she will not be eligible to be reappointed. We are anticipating former Commissioner Sid Lykin applying. We understand in communications we've had with him that his application is complete and will be submitted. And so we have come to you today for the letter of support that's in your packet and asking for approval for that to be signed by your chair.
Okay, any comments? Counselor.
More a question, so I definitely support us sending this letter. I think Mr. Lykin would be a great representative for our region on the OTC. I'm just curious in terms of the wording in the second paragraph, why we don't have specificity on the number of years he served while he was Lane County Commissioner. It says Sid has served numerous years on both the Central Lane MPO Board and Lane Act, and I'm just curious why that choice of words rather than the specific number of years.
I have no explanation other than that's the way I wrote it.
Okay. Do we know what the?
So,
I mean, I know sometimes it can be challenging to work that out, or if.
and there were different stints, to be honest.
Right,
So-
yeah, it was not a continuous in the same position.
Do we know if it was 10 years total, or?
Between the two, at least 10 years, I would say.
Right, because first as the mayor of Springfield and then as the county commissioner.
Well, and he was he was the original and an original officer on the act.
Yeah.
And so we could go back.
And
Well, I think, I apologize if that detail is in here. I think that's a great detail to add, that he was an original Lane Act member. And then if it was, a decade or more, I think being more specific about that actually increases the impact of the letter. So that, I don't mean to wordsmith your work, but just reading it, when I see numerous, I go, well, is that 6? Is that 16? And I think if it's at least a decade, then that, I think, is worth putting that detail in there.
Okay.
certainly can.
Commissioner?
Spare me for the awkwardness of asking questions, but this is my naivete to the process. Can this body recommend more than one person for one position? Because I'm aware of someone whose credentials are unbelievable. Sadly, she's not a member of the Springfield community, but she is a resident of Lane County, and I know she also is going to be applying for this position. I don't mind mentioning the name, but process-wise, I just need to understand how that works.
Can you clarify for us?
Yes, as a matter of fact, the last time that there was an OTC opening, we had one letter of recommendation from this body for 3 applicants that we had contacted specifically to see if they were applying or would be interested in applying. So certainly we can do 1 or 2 separate letters.
Okay, as long as that doesn't violate a protocol or a precedent, what would be the time frame for that?
We need to get these in as soon as possible. This is an appointment made by the governor, has to be ratified by the Senate, but we don't know what the timing of the governor's decision is, so really we need to get this in.
Okay, so just so the body is aware, it's Carmen 4, and Carmen's background in this is kind of tremendous, and I think that she, as much as, perhaps even more, who knows, I don't know all the criteria for consideration, would have as much opportunity to get on this and be appointed and represent the county as anyone. So that's why I was asking a process.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Paul?
I want to raise one point, and we certainly are open to having that letter of support. I don't know if Carmen, who we know, has applied yet. One of the things to keep in consideration is that about the only constraint on OTC membership is that there can be no more than 2 members of the 5 from one political party. In other words, it has to be balanced, 3-2, one direction or the other. And Tammy Bainey is a Republican, and the seat needs to be filled by a Republican.
Well, there's my naivete.
So I don't know, and I don't know if Carmen...
I'm guessing she's not a Republican?
I think it's important that, even with those restrictions, that we continue to advocate for a representative from our area, because we have been sorely unrepresented on the OTC. So even if there are restrictions, I think continuing to let the governor know that you expect to have a representative from our area. The 2nd largest metropolitan area in the state is unrepresented on the OTC.
So this body knows. I'll have her get in touch with you. Maybe she's too late, maybe she's not, but she expressed her interest.
Okay. Fair enough. And then you'll follow up with a timeline if she's too late, because this body would then have to be able to meet and agree if we were going to send another letter.
I would suggest that if you were so inclined, you could
Modify this letter.
Well, you could either modify this letter, or you could simply pass a motion directing us to have a letter prepared for your signature that addresses the point raised by Councilor Surratt, and in a single letter or a separate letter supports Carmen 4 if she is applying.
And that's an if, because I don't know that.
And that's an if, and that's an if. So it feels, well, I'll let some others speak to it. Councilor?
I think fine. Obviously we can consider everybody that's interested, but for right now, I think because we have this in front of us, that time is an issue and it should be uttered forward. I think, and that's a great. You're pointing out the years of service I think is important, and I think possibly even more effectively is that we can come up with a collective years of service for each of those entities that he served under. So if he has 5 years here and 5 years here, and they overlap for a total of 8 years calendar-wise, but you've got 10 years of service on those boards. So I think collectively, would be a good number for them to use, or for us to use on that letter, if that makes any sense. And then I agree that him being part of the founding members of the ACT group would be a great addition to that. And so I think, this would be a separate issue, should be probably kept separate at this point, so we can move forward, and then we can all take a look at at Carmen's. We don't even know if it's going to go, so I don't think it should hold this up.
Right.
Thank you. So I would actually support, if this body would vote to support that, having staff draft up a separate letter in support of Carmen Forr's application pending, discovery of the fact that she's actually applied. I think, speaking to what Brenda had to say, I think putting forward support for two highly qualified candidates demonstrates that this region has the expertise, has the wherewithal to have that representation, that we're not, in a scarcity here in terms of people who could serve in this role. Sometimes, you wonder if you're endorsing two people, is that water it down? But I think in a sense it actually strengthens our position in terms of making that strong statement.
And I truly didn't know. Yeah.
Mayor.
I just always want to remind everyone it is a governor appointment, and she makes it based on her own criteria, I think, because we have put forward stellar candidates, and so far we've been rejected in the choices we've sent forward. So, but sooner or later we're going to win out on this one. We hope. Yes.
So let's proceed and approve with the changes. Could we have a motion to approve with changes the letter on behalf of Sid Lycan, and then let's do that first. And can I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you very much. And then a second request.
So I would move that to direct staff to draft a letter in support of Carmen Forr's application to the OTC, pending confirmation that she has submitted an application.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that's excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's a great strategy. Okay, now we get to move on to 6E, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. Oh, I think, yeah, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. Oh, did I skip something? Oh, I skipped moving ahead. I circled it thinking I'd done it. Excuse me. Moving ahead.
Chair?
Yes.
I will ask, depending on when you have to, and the two mayors have to leave. E is not an action item, but there is direction asked for, and so I will leave it up to you whether you might want to do that quicker item first.
Oh, okay. Let's do that first because, excuse me, Chris, we'll take care of that one first since we have to leave. All right. So we will go to 6E. Gesundheit. Thank you.
So that's me.
That's you. Yes.
Just trying to jump the queue here.
Oh, that's me.
So, in your packet, there is a cover memo and a summary of 6 applications for the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund, statewide discretionary funds through a competitive grant process that's currently going on. I don't want to repeat everything that's in the cover memo. If you recall, the Statewide Transportation Improvement Fund is the new public transportation funding out of House Bill 2017. The largest portion of that funding is the formula funds that flow directly to the public transportation service providers, qualified entities such as Lane Transit District. However, approximately 9% of the money was directed to statewide grant programs. Those initial round of grant applications were submitted February 1st, and under the rules of those statewide grants, the advisory committee for the qualified public transportation service providers, LTD, and the area commissions on transportation around the state weigh in on the grant applications. The rules state that the committees that weigh in on the grant applications may provide comment on the grants, should essentially say, yes, they fund or no fund, sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down, and that those bodies may prioritize those applications. The main reason that I'm bringing this to you today is because I sit on the Lane Act representing you. I sit on the Lane Act as your MPO member voting at that act, and the act next week will take this up. The act next week may or may not finish the discussion. It may spill over into April, but I really have a couple of questions for you. Number one, do you have any concerns or comments on any of the 6 grant applications? Number two, would you want me to advocate for the act prioritizing or not prioritizing these 6 applications? And then number three, there is the potential, and we're not quite sure, but there is the potential for public comment as this moves on to the state level, where the MPO could directly provide input on this, could directly, instead of through the act, comment or prioritize these. I don't want to rush through this too much, but the 6 applications are summarized in the attachment to the cover memo. I have staff here that are much more familiar with all 6 than I am, but if you have questions, we can certainly talk about the applications. And then I will finish by saying that the LTD Advisory Committee, that as I just mentioned, reviews these also, met 2 days ago, and they essentially gave a thumbs up to all 6 applications, and they chose not to prioritize them.
Okay, that's helpful to know. Thank you. Kate?
I will say, being a non-voting member of that committee as well as Carl is, there was a lot of conversation about the 99 West Transit Corridor feasibility study as it's presented as a feasibility study, but the application is actually for the full pilot project. So the notes from the committee were to look at separating those, and then I think his name is John from ODOT. I could be wrong. Mark. Oh yeah, Franny's there too. Franny's our other non-voting member.
Mark Bernard.
Mark from ODOT was there and assured the advisory committee that if the feasibility study looked feasible, that the pilot project would be vetted before it is implemented. So there would be enough oversight on that, and it made the committee feel as though giving a thumbs up on it together was appropriate. But that was just that was the most talked about, I think, of all 6 applications from that group of stakeholders.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions about this? Okay, so you want to vote from us?
No, again, I want direction from you really on the first 2 questions, which is, you want me to represent a thumbs up on all of these for funding, or do you have any concern that might direct me to have a thumbs down on funding one or more of them? And then number 2, do you want to direct me to ask the ACT to prioritize, or are you comfortable with the ACT just providing comments?
Yeah, Mayor.
I would advocate for the list as presented, and I wouldn't advocate for prioritization. For some reason that can go down a rabbit hole sometimes, and if it's not the final decision-making body, then it becomes an issue of, well, we prioritized it, but somebody else completely redid it. So there's, I think what would be helpful for us is, I think some of us, we still have questions about how the STIF is working, period. And so if we had even a little chart about this is the 90% and it goes here and then it goes here and here and here, and how does it get up into OTC or whomever makes the final decisions, is to figure that piece out, and then how does this other amount of money, how does it go through a decision-making process? So that would help us to decide, I think, do we want to prioritize or whatever, is understand how those money, and I know that it's a new pot of money, so the rules are probably going to change after the first round or be modified a little bit. So, but that would be helpful in terms of how we're looking at it, because I've been asked and I'm not sure how that works. So, yeah. So Yeah, so clarity around how this process is working overall. But that would be my recommendation is send that you advocate for the 6 projects and not prioritize them.
Okay. Counselor?
And just for my clarification, on this list of 6 projects, and they're not prioritized, and we want you to advocate saying go for it, thumbs up. So is there a potential to where part of them will get funded, so to speak, or is this, so if you go forward, are we going to get it all, or is there a possibility of getting some? And if there's some, then possibly I would like to know what sum is going to go forward, what would be taken off, if that makes any sense. But is it going to force us to prioritize, or are we going to be good to go with all of them?
So I believe at this point, first of all, what you see on the list is a funding request and a minimum amount needed to proceed. So in some cases, for instance, the 99 West one, the first one on the list, it is asking for $744,000 from the state grant, but minimum needed to proceed is $102,000. If there's a process where there's not enough funding to fund all of the grants around the state, that may want to be one that receives partial funding. I think most of the other ones on here, the Coos Bay to Eugene to Bend vehicle purchase has a minimum amount that's split into 2 potential funding levels, if you will. The Diamond Express, which is the Oak Ridge service, has a minimum amount that is the same as the funding, at least the statewide grant funding request, as do the other 2 that LCOG has submitted. I think, and I'm going to ask Kate if she can help here, I think we have been hearing that the statewide applications are pretty close to the available money. So there's a pretty good chance that most of this is going to get funded.
That's kind of the gist of what I wanted to know is this pretty solid, basically the way it's presented, so we don't have any surprises down the road? And
that's what we're hoping.
Okay, great. And just for grammatics, on your agenda sheet, subject E, the last line should have improvement funds and not program.
We caught that. Thank you.
As far as public records.
Right.
Yep.
Okay, let's see. I got everyone. Any other comments on that? So is there a head nod on go forward?
For
Not
thumbs up.
Thumbs up, thumbs up. Okay, thumbs up, go forward, no prioritization. Any concerns? Any thumbs down, folks? No? Okay.
Any thumbs sideways?
Any thumbs sideways, right. Okay, thank you very much. And okay, so then we're clear on things where we really need direction. And now we are ready for moving ahead. Oh, I just have a process question. Mayor and I are both leaving, so who's in charge when we leave the table?
Yes.
I would say Councilor Surratt as
Oh, boy. You're not gone yet.
I'm not gone yet, but soon. Okay, thank you.
I can handle it.
Thank you.
Arm wrestler for it.
Huh?
Arm wrestle for it.
All right, please.
Chair and members of the committee, I'm Chris Henry, City of Eugene Transportation Planning Engineer, and with me is
Andrew Martin from Lane Transit District.
We're here to provide you an update on Moving Ahead. Moving Ahead is a joint project between the Lane Transit District and City of Eugene to explore safe and accessible transportation options for people, whether they're walking, biking, rolling with a mobility device, or riding the bus along 5 major corridors in Eugene. Those are Highway 99, River Road, Coburg Road, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and from downtown to Lane Community College. We're going to provide you with a bit of project history, talk about some of our outreach efforts throughout the project, and discuss investment packages. We were last here, I believe, in 2015, as Andrew tells me, so it's been a while. During that time, we've been doing some responsible work to analyze the environmental effects of potential investments along major corridors for people. And there's been some turnover in staff that are still around the location, and also with our consultant teams during that time. What we have produced, and what we'll get into a little bit later, is an alternatives analysis that took a look at many environmental disciplines along each corridor separately. And then we're also developing what we're calling investment packages that you'll hear a little bit about later. We have just a few slides and a video, but there's a lot to talk about, and we're saving time for a discussion there. We can touch on funding that Mr. Zako brought up, because that's an important piece of this as well. And hopefully, our video plays loud enough for you to hear it.
Plays at all.
It's their long-range plan of the
Please.
No, I'm sorry, City of Eugene.
Oh.
I've met him a few times.
We get it down now. We just not really worried. It's nothing.
We expect 34,000 new residents and 37,000 new jobs in our community by 2032. Existing city efforts like Envision Eugene and our transportation system plan call for managing growth in a way that protects and enhances our quality of life and reflects our shared values as Eugeneans. These commitments include promoting 20-minute neighborhoods where residents can fulfill most of their daily needs close to home, and connecting our community with efficient transportation options, including a network of frequent and reliable transit services that's bus every 15 minutes or faster throughout our community. To support these values and goals, the city and Lane Transit District are working together to create a safer, more accessible transportation system through a project called Moving Ahead.
Moving Ahead started in 2015 with a series of community meetings to better understand where people are traveling to, how they prefer to travel, and what improvements can be made around Eugene. Based on your feedback, we are focused on 5 key corridors that will benefit the most from investments. These are Highway 99, River Road, downtown to Lane Community College on 30th Avenue, Coburn Road, and Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard.
Instead of looking at one corridor, we're analyzing 3 options for all 5 corridors. These options are based upon the feedback you gave us early in the process. The first option is no action, or the no build alternative, which means no investments will be made right away. The second option is the enhanced corridor alternative, a lower level of investment than MX, which includes transit service improvements to make it more appealing to ride by consolidating stops, giving buses priority at signals, and enhancing some bus stops. It also includes investments for people walking, biking, and using mobility devices, like signalized pedestrian crossings and protected bike lanes, and street-side improvements like street trees and better lighting. The third option, MX, is being considered for all of the corridors except Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. MX is the highest level of investment being considered and includes all of the MX bus and station features you're familiar with. And this option includes investments for people walking, biking, using mobility devices, as well as street-side improvements like street trees and better lighting.
In order to be eligible for federal funding, we need to conduct an in-depth analysis to better understand the trade-offs of the different options and how they can help make better, safer connections for all of us. The options were evaluated on a range of factors such as improvements in safety, access for people walking, biking, and using mobility devices, impacts on bus travel time and ridership, effects on existing businesses and residents, effects on natural resources, air and water, and cost. Now we need your input to help us determine which option should move forward on each corridor. Should we consider the no-build option and leave the corridor as is, or should we make investments and select either the enhanced corridor or MX option? The findings from the in-depth analysis paired with your input will help us determine which future investments to make.
The next step in the process will be to combine the preferred options for each corridor into a comprehensive package that identifies where we should invest in the system based on community preference and the project goals. Your feedback will help the LTD Board and the Eugene City Council pick the best package of investments in 2019. Our goal is to have a list of priority projects that can be built in the next 10 years, ensuring that as Eugene continues to grow, our community has a robust transportation system that serves everyone.
Thank you for the background, by the way.
So we conducted this alternatives analysis over the last few years and presented it last fall for public comment and received feedback about what was important to people in the individual corridors based on their values. And what we found from the more objective assessment was that the benefits scale to, and the effects on the corridors scale to the level of investment. You spend more, you get more, and you affect people in different ways based on how much money you invest in the corridors or the level of changes that are made to provide for people walking, biking, using a mobility device, or riding the bus. Many of the environmental topics didn't help answer the question of, well, what should we do? What has the greatest effect or the greatest benefit? There weren't very many differentiating factors there. So we looked, and Andrew's going to get into this a little bit later, but we looked at the whole system, the corridors individually, and now we're bringing them back to the community. We're going to have a public comment period beginning March 11th through April 10th, and we have an open house that Andrew will mention as well. And so we're going to be asking now the community to provide feedback on combinations of investments on those corridors.
So as Chris mentioned, last fall we published our alternatives analysis and we did our first public comment period. We went out to the community, I think at like 17 different tabling events. We sent out tens of thousands of letters to people who were within the corridor, within a half mile of each of the corridors. We sent letters to potentially impacted property owners and offered to meet with them individually. And through all that, we tried to build up towards, we held actually 4 open houses, one in each of the corridors. We combined Martin Luther King Jr. and Coburg. So we did 4 open houses, and we did an online open house during that month-long comment period. We asked people kind of 2 questions. We asked them in each corridor, which mode makes this, which alternative makes the most sense? Is it the no build, the enhanced corridor, or the MX alternative within each of the corridors? And we also asked them about what their values were and what the criteria that we're using to evaluate the project, how we should prioritize those. We heard from the in-person open house and the online open house the same things. We heard that people prioritize investments for people who are walking and biking. How this would affect ridership on LTD's network, the potential savings in transit travel time, changes in our annual operating cost, and the number of people and jobs that we serve with these investments. And that was universal across both of them. That's not to say other criteria weren't important, but we found that people really focused on the benefits of the project, and they focused less on the potential impacts that these projects would create. When we asked them about which mode they preferred in each corridor, we heard pretty resoundingly that no build isn't an option, or it's not a good option compared to the other ones. In all the corridors, the no build was the lowest rated alternative. On River Road, we heard that the community very slightly preferred MX over the enhanced corridor, and on the rest of them, we heard that the enhanced corridor was the correct alternative, or it worked the best for them. Keep in mind, these are the average ratings. So what you're seeing in this graph, the gray is the no build, blue is enhanced corridor, and green is MX. And these are the average ratings when we asked about each of those alternatives. So using all of the feedback we got from the community, using the technical analysis, all the environmental work we did, we developed a series of investment packages. And what you see here are the 5 investment packages. You're seeing what we call 2 bookend packages. So we said, what does it look like if you do all enhanced corridor? What does it look like if you do all MX? Keep in mind, the Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard corridor, we're not proposing MX. That's only proposed to have enhanced corridor. The rest of the packages, they start out at a lower level of investment. Package A only has 2 build alternatives, and they build upon each other to scale up. Package C is the greatest level of investment out of those 3, with build alternatives in all 5 corridors. So using these, we're going to go back out to the public starting next week, actually. On Monday, we're opening our online open house. We'll be out in the corridors with LTD's outreach bus, trying to generate some buzz and answer questions, get people to take the online open house, and come to our open house on March 18th, which is at the UO Baker Center on High Street. That's from 5:30 to 7:30. We'll be having our open house, sharing information. We'd love to get your feedback on the alternatives, on the packages, I should say. We do have a lot of information to share, way too much for the time we've been given in this meeting. So please check out movingahead.org. There's going to be a lot on there, a lot of really good stuff, I think. And what we're going to do after our public comment period is kind of regroup, summarize all those comments, get ready to take this back to our decision makers. We're going to go to LTD's board and the city council in a joint work session before city council goes on their break this summer. We're going to refine the packages and come back in the fall and hopefully engage our decision makers in some public hearings, joint work sessions, and a conversation about really what the community is going to end up selecting as our preferred package of investments. So with that, I think we'd like to turn it over to questions. I know that we kind of glossed over a lot of things. Some of you may have seen this presentation a number of times, but there's a lot there, and we'd love to answer any questions you have.
Questions, comments? Commissioner Burney, go ahead.
You want to go? Joe?
Commissioner Burney?
Joe. I'm sorry, she's in charge. If you went, I don't know if you can, but the chart that showed the result of public input. Yeah, that one. Yes. How many people is that?
So that represents over 400 people.
I'm sorry, 400 people, and what would you say your ridership is, or your desired ridership?
Desired ridership is a harder question to answer. Every bus is full. Our current ridership, I think we're getting about 36 to 37,000 people per day.
Okay, so my only comment, and I know you know this, is that 400 people out of 30-some thousand in order to develop investment package portfolios might not be enough. That's all. Sure. And I know you're about to open more public input. I'm the first to admit I don't know what I'm talking about, and I appreciate even being able to be with you all. But what I've seen so far, it looks like the reach is for a quantity of input, not necessarily a quality of input. And I'm also curious how you're debating with the public the different ideas that are forward.
Well, we don't debate, but we listen to their concerns. And I think what you see is one of the challenges with leadership and decision making is that the data doesn't always lead you to the answer. But we have policy framework through Envision Eugene, the Eugene 2035 Transportation System Plan, Lane Transit District's Long Range Transit Plan, the city's Climate Recovery Ordinance, and Eugene's Vision Zero Action Plan that points to us making investments for people moving along these corridors and providing options for them to do so. What we do see with this small sample is a preference to do something as opposed to doing nothing. We're looking at investments over 10 years. It's not all right now. And as far as we've heard about prioritization before, and this is maybe an opportunity where I can elaborate on funding, we've engaged with the Lane Council of Governments to help identify funding sources for us and a strategy and timing for when that funding might be available, and how both at the federal level and the local level, or state and local level, because there could be a mix of how we get all the dollars together to do what we want to do, and maybe how we chip away incrementally at some of these investments. That it is a challenging decision-making process that takes some leadership to do this, to be honest.
Commissioner Piscinier.
Quit selling yourself short, number one.
You've been doing it for 60
You're
years.
good. Don't sell yourself short. We respect what you have to say. Thought I'd get that out there.
Thank you,
All right. So on your information gathering, and I know this was a partnership between Eugene and LTD, and that's awesome. And we got our thing going too with you guys, so we're not operating in a vacuum. So when you're getting that information from those 400, or a little bit more than 10% of your total ridership, actually not even 10.
Yeah.
So
not even one.
But I'm really, did you, or have you thought of delineating of that group who are, you're doing, mostly get the information you're getting are from writers, but they're not, I mean, that's about all you get. That's kind of hard.
Not necessarily.
So, anyway, if you're not, that's great. But I'd be curious as to how many of that, what percentage of those folks are property owners, not strictly business, but property owners that are along those corridors that would be affected, and what the numbers are there, and also affected businesses and what the numbers are there, the percentage of those compared to the general comments of saying, hey, let's move forward, let's do the enhanced version, da 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 da. So I would assume that those numbers start shifting quite a bit the more effect it has on those neighborhoods in regards to the actual property owners and business owners. Is that not true?
Yes.
We sent out, I think it was 304, there are 341 tax lots that potentially have impacts. We sent multiple letters to each of them, and we said, hey, we want to come to you at your business, at your home, and we want to meet with you and explain the project designs. We want to take your public comment. That, I mean, those people may have taken our open house, they may not have,
right.
But we did a special effort with those people saying, we want to collect your public comment because we understand you're the person who may be, I don't want to say the most impacted, but if we're talking about your property, there's a different kind of impact there. And it's not just property takings, it's access impacts. We looked at it as pretty broadly. Anyone who's going to be specially impacted, we want to make a special outreach effort to them, understanding that we do owe them the opportunity to comment, and it might take a little more effort, and we should do that. So
I'm not sure why.
In our
probably experienced saying it's almost like pulling teeth sometimes, and I don't know why.
Well,
until something happens, then it's like.
And they're knocking down your door.
It is challenging, but I think it's also really valuable to get the feedback from the people who did engage with us.
Right.
We heard a lot of, frankly, really good ideas that we're going to take into the next phase, because these are pretty high-level designs.
Right.
We need to get through this stage. We do some environmental work with the Federal Transit Administration to get the funding to get to that next stage where we can sit down and say, okay, we do need to survey, and maybe we thought we were going to impact your property. What if we shifted that station a little bit? And those are the kind of conversations we wanted to have with property owners along the corridor. But we also,
I admire what
riders
I admire what you're doing, and
yeah.
it's hard. It's a hard ball to juggle. I totally respect that and admire you for doing that. And that'd be a difficult thing to figure out.
And we focused on talking to riders, but also we want to talk to a lot of not transit riders because it is a multimodal project.
Right.
And this isn't just about LTD building another MX line. It is about the multimodal improvements and making the corridor work for everyone, including people who drive. We're interested in safety for everyone on the corridors.
We've met, both agencies were at these meetings with property owners along the corridor, and we, what was typical that we would hear is and it's similar to how decision-making goes in Eugene, at least on this side of the freeway, is that there was general support for the whole concept and the system, but there was concern about the immediate effects on their interests or their properties.
Thank you.
I've got Commissioner Smith next, and then Ye, and then Reed. MPO Commissioner. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So a couple of questions on the enhanced, and what's your judgment on the knowledge of the participants in this, in what their knowledge was of what an enhancement was, what the enhancement project was?
Well, so we had similar information for MX. I mean, I think it's easier to imagine MX because we can point you, say, check that out, that's already operating. I don't want to make assumptions about how people took it, but we had all the same information about it. It is a little different, but one way to, the way I talk to people and they say, what really is this? I say, imagine something that's not MX, but it's not nothing. It's somewhere in between, and we can get into this.
Do you have any illustrations or any descriptions?
Sure, yeah.
How detailed were they and easy enough to get to before somebody would put in this kind of input?
Well, if you go through the 400 pages, alternatives analysis, you get a lot of detail about what the definition is and what the effects are. But essentially, the enhanced corridor is frequent service, transit signal priority to bypass points of congestion, and perhaps slightly more frequent stops.
And I think maybe we didn't stress this enough. They work from the same toolbox. So when you ask like, does someone know what that might look like? We're talking about the same treatments. So when we talk about enhanced corridors having queue jumps or things like that, we can go out and show you a queue jump. We have them on 11th Avenue as part of our MX project. It's just scaled down. We don't have as many of them. Maybe instead of a protected bikeway, it's a buffered bikeway.
And so I'm just going to claim, Commissioner Burney, ignorance on how the presentation was. I read the paperwork and the documents and all that, but I just wonder how many people would go through that and then answered this, got your input from this, how knowledgeable were they before they made these inputs? And that's kind of a concern for me, is enhancement versus MX. And then I share Commissioner Pictionary's concern about were the landowners involved. And any public agency has problems getting input. Coburg had the same issue, and we try and send out letters and knock on doors and everything, and we still have property owners that after you've gone through the entire planning process, they come in and say, how dare you? And it's like, where were you for the last 2 years when we were planning this? So that's a given in anything we do. But that input and how knowledgeable was the population to give that input was kind of a concern I had with it.
Commissioner Ye.
Yes. Well, I wanted to mention that the work session that we had with City Council went very well, where we approved the investment packages. And I wanted to make sure that everyone knew that this is a investment in our future and a conversation that has to start now. And I think everyone recognizes that, but I think it's important not to lose sight of that. Oh, well, I guess one last thing. Well, one person on the city council, whom I will not name, one of Claire's colleagues, did say something I thought was insightful, which was that if you look at some of the streets that we have now, some of them are really just not working for anyone, drivers, cyclists, pedestrians, and so forth. So if they're not working now, if we're going to get up to 35,000 more people in the next 10 years possibly, it's probably not going to be that great later. So.
Commissioner Reed. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about a couple things. Rob Zako mentioned it when he did his public comment earlier about how Transit Tomorrow feeds into this Moving Ahead project. And while we may have had the cart before the horse at some point, I think we have them right now. And Transit Tomorrow will really tell us what our community is looking for with how our transit system operates. And this is specifically looking at how to operate that transit system within our current infrastructure. So when we were talking about Highway 99, River Road, 30th LCC, Coburg Road, MLK Boulevard, and the community's asking us, maybe they're asking us to do rapid bus service in all the major corridors. So we could look at Coburg Road, it's a great example of putting in 15 or 10-minute service on Coburg Road right now and say that, well, that's not possible. We couldn't do that with the infrastructure we have currently. So when from my perspective, I mean, always getting public engagement. I did my own work in the public engagement sector for a while. It's hard. It's very hard to get people to talk to you until something happens, and then they really, really want to talk to you. And it's a little late. Like, we have some people who are asking now if they can give more comment on our Transit Tomorrow project, which is closed for public engagement at this point. And, you know, we'll of course let them tell us what they want to tell us. But you know, there are multiple facets, and I think it's been a 6-year process. I don't know, I wasn't there for the first few years of it. But there's been a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of thought and a lot of collaboration. And we are all very aware of how the West MX project went with public engagement and business owners. And so everybody at LTD is very sensitive to making sure that we're talking to the right people at the right time. And I know that because this project has been such a long process, that in this next public engagement period, they will be doing more more public engagement than maybe other projects would have done in the past because it's been a while. It's been a bit of time since we've heard directly from the public what they want. So I feel like we'll have a good informed position to make decisions from this fall. That's just my opinion.
Thank you. Any other comments, discussion? So I'll just say I unfortunately missed the joint work session with LTD, and I regret that. It couldn't be avoided. And I guess the only other thing, and you've just addressed a little bit around the transit tomorrow, is, I've also had a concern about what if we carry out these two processes and they give us conflicting information, and what is the mechanism to kind of reconcile that? If, the River Road corridor wants more frequent service, but overall LTD, customers want increased ridership, how do we as two different agencies, work through that? So maybe that's not how it's playing out, but that's just something that comes to mind as we think about this. You would never support this.
If you're looking for a response.
Sure.
So I mean, Transit Tomorrow really is a short-range look. Moving ahead, Tom Schwetz, our planning director, describes as kind of the North Star decision, where we want to end up. And Transit Tomorrow, fortunately, the way it's looking, things are not amiss, if you will. But if kind of in a conceptual way, where we have frequent service now is where we're talking about making investments, or not necessarily frequent service in the sense of 15 minutes, but our most popular routes, our routes with the most service right now, those are kind of those corridors, and those are the corridors Eugene's going to grow on. Right. So in some way, Transit Tomorrow in the short run might say one thing, but if Eugene is growing in those corridors and they're going to continue to be our most frequent and our busiest corridors, making investments in them, I think, is still it's still a conversation that we can engage in, even if in the short run it's.
Right. Well, so I guess another way to frame that is Transit Tomorrow is asking, how do you want the service to exist today, given the infrastructure we have today? And moving ahead is saying, what is our vision to plan for the infrastructure we want in the future?
And pairing this with the SIF funds that are coming in, we have a lot of interesting projects, a lot of checks and balances that can occur with our spending, and really looking at Transit Tomorrow as this iterative process that every 3 years we'll reevaluate where we are and see how our agency can continue to become adaptive and agile to the changing technology, the growth of our community, economic development regions. Anything that happens, we'll be ready for it before hopefully we get too far along.
Great.
Just really quickly, I just want to make sure it was known that there would never be a discrepancy between the city council and LTD. So if
No, that wasn't what I was saying.
Oh, okay, just making sure. Okay, good. So
It's between the public feedback that we might get from those two different processes.
Yeah, and I can't say just, the public feedback, I think, is public knowledge at this point for Transit Tomorrow. We've seen it in a few presentations, and it is looking similar. There is obviously there are some voices that are in opposition of the masses, or some equitable voices in there, but we are seeing that people want to get places more quickly and have that freedom to do that within some of these corridors.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate the update and the hard work. So our last part of our agenda is follow-up and next steps of various things. So first up is the ODOT update.
For Annie Brindle, ODOT, I just wanted to remind everybody, if you haven't heard, that the 6th Street on-ramp to I-105 northbound, eastbound will be closed starting the 18th of March for about 6 weeks. It's the first of the 4 ramp closures that will happen. It's the least amount of traffic on the ramp. It'll give the contractor a good way of sizing up the project, how it's going to go. It's involving bridge rail replacement and bridge joint replacement, as well as panel work, concrete panel work. The other thing I wanted to mention was that we made it through a pretty tough week of storms. We had our maintenance crews working continually at some of their own peril and without power, and I really wanted to just put a shout out to them. And that, you know, that we have a really good group of people that cooperate and collaborate with each other. They worked with the city and the counties to make sure that snow plows and materials, sanding materials were shared. And then last, we are having our director, our ODOT director, Matt Garrett's going to be leaving our agency at the end of June. And the OTC, the Transportation Commission, is going through a thorough process for recruiting a new director, a nationwide search. There will be opportunities for stakeholder input on interview panels and whatnot. So I think it would probably behoove this body to either, you know, mention something about wanting to be involved in that recruitment. So thank you. That's all.
Any questions for Franny? All right, great, thank you. Springfield Main Street safety update.
Yes, the project is on schedule. Still in the early phases of the project, evaluating existing conditions, developing goals and policies. Their stakeholder advisory committee and the technical advisory committee, those committees both met recently, focusing on developing the goals and policies. And everything's on track. Gearing up for a city council briefing Monday night.
Great. Any questions, comments? Okay. Do we have a rail update?
Yes, we do, Council. Thank you. A bill has been introduced into the Washington State Legislature, which would allocate about $3.25 million to develop a rail authority for the Cascadia line. That rail authority would look at 1-hour train rides between Portland to Vancouver, British Columbia. So the rail authority would look at things like governance and things like that, because it would cross 2 states as well as an international boundary. Last year, Oregon promised $200,000, British Columbia promised $300,000, and Microsoft has promised to, right now, another $300,000. They already gave $200,000, so Microsoft is also involved in that. The Rail Authority would be charged with, like I said, developing the organizational structure of this, but would also engage with communities up and down the corridor, including all the way down to Eugene, and look at things as station location, rail alignment, that sort of thing. And last year, the Washington Legislature allocated $1.2 million to develop a business case study to look at a number of trips and fares and that sort of things, as well as a detailed market analysis. And an international advisory committee has been put together to look at all of this. So just as an update, it looks like it's moving forward.
That's very exciting. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any questions? All right. Lane Act update.
That's me again.
All right.
The Lane Act will be meeting next Wednesday evening, March 13th. The main topic on the agenda is reviewing the STIF applications. Paul described that for us earlier. Excuse me. There'll be an opportunity for the applicants themselves to present their proposals to the Lane Act. As Paul described, the Lane Act, along with the LTD Advisory Committee, will be presenting recommendations to ODOT later on in the year. That will take a good portion of the meeting. Also on the agenda, there will be some discussion of the OTC vacancy, which you talked about here briefly, and the OTC's efforts to recruit a new director, ODOT director, that Franny just referred to. Those are the main items on the agenda.
Okay. MTIP administrative amendments.
As always, those are in your packet to just inform you of what your advisory committee has done, and if there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Any questions for Paul? don't see any. And any next steps agenda build to be done? It's like my third MPO, so I don't feel I'm in the know enough to help us build an agenda.
We have plenty coming up.
Okay. Well, great. So this body meets again on April 4th at the Springfield Justice Center. And unless there are any last comments before we adjourn. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the presentations. We are adjourned.
Thank you.